One following up from last week's, 1 Corinthians 12. So, the person that we know as the Apostle Paul was a teacher within the Jewish tradition. And I don't think that we realize, because the truth is, I think the tradition has really painted Paul with a conservative brush because I think they misunderstood him. A lot of the present biblical scholarship is affirming this possibility. So we're going, oh yeah, Paul, he's the guy who says women can't talk in church. Well, actually, may have been one of his disciples who said that and kind of put his name at the end of the letter just to give it credibility. I think what we see at the heart of 1 Corinthians 13 and also in Romans, I think, is the very seed of his developing his understanding around this new community. And what we're going to hear in this particular passage is that this new community, it's really interesting, you see. It doesn't say that this is the community for Christians and this is the community for Jews, and this is the communities for slave, and this is the community for free. And this is the community for women, and this is the community for men. Because very much, many of the ancient traditions, whether that was the intention, ended up becoming those communities that were divided by all these lines and set out by all these rules. And what Paul is saying is, no. And you just know he's spent years and years pondering this over because it has got to be a mystery for him, coming out of the religion of the clan where everything was laid out black and white. And he's saying, it's all one. It's all one community. We are all one community. And then the metaphor he uses to describe that is the body. And you can understand how some people would get really uncomfortable by that because it's going to suddenly put a whole lot of priests out of business, just like that. A whole lot of rituals at the temple to make sure that people keep themselves clean so they can be in this community. Those rituals, gone. You'll recall, maybe, the big fight that he and Peter had over table fellowship. Peter's saying, no, we've got to follow the Jewish dietary laws. And Paul's going, I don't think so. I don't think those matter, if they ever did. And so he wrestles throughout Romans with, this was the law, but, can you even imagine this man looking at this entire foundation of the tradition and going, it doesn't matter anymore. We are called to be a new community where people don't have to jump through these hoops to get in. Us fairly liberal 21st century folk, I don't think at some level can comprehend what a radical leap that was for members of the early church. Which when Rome got in charge kind of pushed it right back to another version of itself. So listen to these words of Paul. The body of Christ has many different parts, just as any other body does. Some of us are Jews. I would add, some of us are Muslims. And others are Gentiles or Buddhists. Some of us are slaves and others are free. Some of us are poor and others are middle class. But God's Spirit baptized each of us and made us part of the body of Christ. God put our bodies together in such a way that even the parts that seem least important are valuable. God did this to make all parts of the body work together smoothly, with each part caring about the others. Now, we all drink from that same Spirit. And then from John's Gospel, it's an excerpt from a conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a Sadducee, a member of the priestly class, and he's watching this Jesus movement unfold, and he just wants to know what's going on. And among Jesus' response to his questions was, the Spirit is like the wind that blows wherever it wants to. You can hear the wind, but you do not know from where it comes or to where it is going. Christine Waltner's Painter writes of this season. February 1st and 2nd marks a confluence of several feasts and occasions, including the Celtic feast of Imbolc, St. Bridget's Day, Candlemas, Feast of the Presentation, and last but certainly not least, on this side of the planet, Groundhog Day. Imbolc, spelled I-M-B-O-L-C in Gaelic, is a Celtic feast that is cross-quarter day, meaning it is the midway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. The sun marks the 4 quarter days of the year, 2 solstices, 2 equinoxes, and the midpoints are the cross-quarter days. In some cultures, February 2nd is the official beginning of spring. As the days slowly lengthen in the northern hemisphere and the sun makes her way higher into the sky, the ground beneath our feet begins to thaw. The earth softens and the seeds deep below stir in the darkness. The word Imbolc means in the belly. The earth's belly is beginning to awaken. New life is stirring. Seeds are beginning to sprout. In many places, the ground is still frozen or covered with snow, but the call now is to tend to those very first signs of movement beneath the fertile ground. What happens when you listen ever so closely in the stillness? What do you hear beginning to emerge? What new seeds are stirring deep in your belly? End of quote. The Celts organized their sacred days around the seasons of creation, and therefore they have 8 significant days, the 2 equinoxes, the 2 solstices, and the 4 cross quarters. Each of these days is marked as a feast day and a day to pay attention, a day to read the signs. Signs that are built into the natural rhythms of the earth with a conviction that the earth holds deep wisdom, that we are invited to share. The Celtic tradition maintained a deep connection to the rhythms of the seasons. Its rituals were firmly planted in this world. The things on earth were sacred, and it was through these very earthly, sacred vessels that we then experienced the mystery. Every sacred vessel is the name of this piece of art. I think I have a deep affinity for the Celtic tradition because in that tradition, everything is a sign. Everything is a sign that points to something deeper and richer and larger. Yet at the same time, Within that tradition, there was no suggestion that the sign itself was of no importance, so that the hearth that was lit every morning in order to provide light and heat and a fire over which to cook was also a sign that the eternal fire and spirit was present. But it was still that fire that gave warmth and that fire that provided help to prepare sustenance. The sign itself was important. The Church of Christendom had a love-hate relationship with the material world. In its fairly warped cosmology, the material world was where sin resided. And so began the assault on the flesh, or on the more earthy elements of life, which I would argue is life itself. And so rather than inviting us to go more deeply into our humanness, major elements of the church in Christendom often invited us to be less human or less ourselves or less embodied, because this is where all the sin took place. I'm not sure how any of us ever managed to pull that off, or what the implications are when in fact we try and be less than ourselves. The handicap, and I think there were many, that resulted was a blindness to the movement of the Spirit in and among us. Either we did not acknowledge it at all, or we left it to the Pentecostals and flinched a bit. Nicodemus, a member of the religious elite, a Sadducee, knows that something is afoot, that something is in the air, that there is movement in places where there had not been movement before, and he wants to know what is going on. And so he goes out into the night to talk to Jesus in secret. And the answer that Jesus provides for him confounds him. The Spirit is like the wind that blows wherever it wants to. You can hear the wind, but you do not know from where it comes and where it is going. We are standing at a threshold together, preparing for the next era of our life together in the Spirit. And we know that the Spirit is active among us and through us. We know because of all the signs. There are some big ones, like 2 gifts, each of $100,000 in 10 years. From people you don't even know. Friends from Vancouver who, when they heard we were trying to buy the building to create the store, said, "I'd like in with $10,000, please." Friends from the county, as recalled last week by Irene, who, when we heard the company from whom we bought our chairs had virtually gone into bankrupt and had our $6,500, and our pews were long gone, said, "If you need a truck to go pick them up, just let me know." And in the middle of the biggest snowstorm, went all the way down to fetch those chairs for us. We know because when we needed a piano, it showed up. When we started talking about a labyrinth, In came the $5,000 from people that we did not know. We know because of all the testimonies that have been shared with us from this place, each one an example of how the Spirit has found a way to blow into the lives of people and surprise them. People who stand up and say, I said I would never do church again, but here I am. People who stand up and say, I'm not really a Christian in the traditional sense of the word, but here I am. People who stand up and say, somebody invited me and I said yes, so here I am. We know that the Spirit is moving in and among us because this denomination alone has lost another 10,000 members in the last 3 years, and yet we have been born again. The Spirit is like the wind that blows wherever it wants to. You can hear the wind, but you do not know from where it comes and to where it is going. And so let me suggest that the groundwork has now been laid for the next era of our lives together. And our largest task as this next era unfolds is to be sensitive to the movement of the Spirit, to live in partnership with the movement of the Spirit. We need to be totally convinced that this time and this place and this circle of friends is a vehicle for something much larger than us. And our biggest task is to pay attention to all the signs and to embrace those divine surprises when they show up, and then to celebrate them. That's it. We have now been caught up with something so much larger than we are. It might be a wild ride, a magical ride, a ride full of blessings, encouragement, and lots of friends. I invite you now during this time for contemplation. To ask for eyes to see in your own personal life, the divine surprises that are knocking at your door. To ask for that kind of sight that is framed with an understanding that the gifts will show up. They have always shown up.